The question has always lingered. What does the devil look like? In the cult classic film, O Brother, Where Art Thou?, George Clooney's character displays profound knowledge of demonology and the nature of Satan. He declares, "Sure, there are plenty of minor demons and devils, Pete, but the great Satan himself appears red and scaly with a forked tail. He holds a pitchfork in his hands." This description aligns with the traditional, stereotypical image of Satan: red skin, scales, pitchfork, iconography especially common in cartoons and even briefly featured in Star Trek: The Next Generation. Yet this portrayal has no biblical basis and is not ancient within the broader history of Judaism and Christianity. It likely emerged from a complex interweaving of medieval and Renaissance artistic traditions. However, this discussion focuses less on the origin of this stereotypical depiction and more on the underlying concept of Satan, specifically the Christian understanding of him as a fallen angel, ruler of demons, chief tempter to sin, and, within cosmic history, God's implacable adversary. It's important to note that even among Christians, there is no consensus on the nature of Satan. Disagreements typically center on whether he is a real entity or a metaphor for evil and temptation. For those who view Satan as a real being, he is usually understood as a fallen angel, a created being who rebelled against God and now leads other fallen angels, known as demons. This view is widespread across most Christian traditions, including various Orthodox denominations and official Catholic doctrine. Pope Francis, for instance, has repeatedly emphasized Satan's reality, stating plainly, "We must not think of the devil as a myth, a representation, a symbol, a figure of speech, or an idea. That error will lead us to lower our guard." Protestants are more divided. Some denominations interpret Satan metaphorically, while evangelicals generally regard him as a real being. For many Pentecostals, often categorized by scholars as part of evangelicalism, Satan is a tangible, active, and malevolent threat, playing a central role in an ongoing spiritual warfare. Of course, these are broad generalizations. Religions are internally diverse, even within a single denomination or congregation. Christians may hold widely differing views on Satan. Survey data on belief in Satan is sparse and sometimes contradictory. Yet a 2009 poll indicated that as many as 40% of American Christians firmly agreed that Satan is not a living being, but rather a symbol of evil. Thus, disbelief in Satan's literal existence is far from a fringe position. Nevertheless, this discussion will trace the historical development of the concept that Satan is a real, fallen angel and God's sworn enemy. As we see, Satan has a history, and this idea evolved over time. We begin with ancient Israelite religion and the texts of the Hebrew Bible. Here, there is no notion of a singular, supreme evil entity opposing God. The Hebrew word Satan appears several times, usually translated as adversary or accuser. In the earliest parts of the Hebrew Bible, however, this noun simply refers to human opponents. For example, in 1 Samuel chapter 29, verse 4, the Philistines described King David as a potential adversary, using the same Hebrew term. But in later biblical texts, the concept appears to evolve into a kind of divine office, akin to a prosecutor. The most prominent biblical depiction of this divine prosecutor occurs in the Book of Job. In its opening chapters, God presides over a heavenly council of divine beings. Among them is a figure called Ha-Satan, the adversary, or the accuser. Crucially, Satan here is not a proper name, but a title. This accuser functions like a legal opponent in a divine court. Notably, the Hebrew text uses the definite article, the Satan, suggesting a specific, recurring figure. This heavenly adversary challenges Job's integrity, arguing that Job serves God only because he is blessed and would curse God if tested. A similar figure appears in the book of Zechariah, where the Satan stands as prosecutor against the high priest Joshua, while the angel of the Lord acts as his defender. It's essential to recognize that neither of these portrayals reflects later Christian conceptions of Satan. The adversary in Job is not a prince of demons, not a fallen angel, and certainly not an absolute evil antagonist of God. He appears to be part of God's own divine counsel. Importantly, both these texts were composed during or after the Babylonian exile. For those familiar with ancient Israelite history, the Babylonians destroyed Jerusalem in 586 BCE and exiled much of Judah's elite. When the Achaemenid Persian Empire conquered Babylon, the Persians allowed the exiles to return to Judah. Nothing in pre-exilic Israelite religion resembles the Christian Satan. No fallen angels ruling other fallen angels, no singular enemy of God. Yet scholars suspect that something during this exile period triggered a conceptual shift from Satan, lowercase, a role, to Satan, uppercase, a specific recurring opponent. That something may well have been Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism, an ancient Iranian religion that endures to this day, profoundly influenced post-exilic Jewish theology. From 550 BCE, when Jews returned from exile, until 323 BCE, when Alexander the Great conquered the region, Judah was part of the Achaemenid Persian Empire. Scholars argue that the Jewish elite in exile inevitably interacted with Persian religious thinkers, absorbing theological ideas, particularly Zoroastrian ones. Central to Zoroastrianism is the cosmic dualism between Ahura Mazda, the embodiment of absolute good, and Angra Mainyu, Ahriman, the embodiment of absolute evil, locked in eternal struggle. Studying Zoroastrian influence on post-exilic Judaism is challenging. Few scholars possess deep expertise in both Jewish apocalyptic literature and Zoroastrian texts, limiting comprehensive analysis. Nevertheless, specialists like Albert de Jong argue that Second Temple Jewish writings show clear signs of Zoroastrian influence. It's crucial to understand that influence here oversimplifies a centuries-long, complex process of cultural exchange. A superficial but telling example is the demon Asmodeus in the Book of Tobit, portrayed as an exceptionally wicked spirit and primary antagonist. His name likely derives from the Zoroastrian demon Ayeshma, a lieutenant of Angra Mainyu. More systematically, later Jewish texts develop a theology of cosmic conflict between spiritual forces of good and evil, often symbolized by light and darkness. This Iranian influence is most evident in the Dead Sea Scrolls. These include non-biblical texts articulating a two spirits theology. For instance, the Community Rule, a key Dead Sea Scroll, states that God created the spirits of light and darkness, and upon them established every deed, and upon their paths set every action. The angel of darkness is responsible for all evil and sin. He leads astray all the sons of righteousness. All their sins, transgressions, ungodliness, and lawless deeds are due to his dominion. In the scrolls, this evil spirit is named Belial, a wicked angel commanding an army of other evil angels. Here we glimpse the emerging archetype of Satan. Another text, the War Scroll, describes a final battle between the Sons of Light, led by the Archangel Michael, and the Sons of Darkness, led by Belial. Many scholars see this stark opposition, light versus darkness, Michael versus Belial, good versus evil, as clear evidence of Zoroastrian influence among certain Second Temple Jewish sects. Some scholars go further, linking these ideas to the Zoroastrian sect of the Zervanites, who believed Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu were twin offspring of a higher primordial being, Zervan. The Dead Sea Scrolls, however, maintain that the God of Israel remains sovereign over both spirits of light and darkness. Yet the scrolls are not the only source reflecting such dualism. Earlier apocalyptic texts also begin shaping the idea of a singular, evil, angelic figure, especially in the Book of Enoch. This work expands on Genesis 6's cryptic account of the sons of God, angelic beings who seduced human women, fathering the Nephilim, possibly from the Hebrew root to fall. These rebellious angels taught humanity forbidden arts, magic, astrology, warfare. In 1st Enoch, their leader is variously named, not Satan or Belial, but Shemihaza or Azazel. Shemihaza opposes the archangel Michael. Azazel opposes Raphael. In another section, 4 archangels seem to equate Shemihaza with Azazel, suggesting God granted him authority. Elsewhere, in the Dream Visions section, angels appear as stars, and Azazel is the first to fall, introducing the idea of evil angels literally descending from heaven. The word Satan does appear in 1st Enoch, but not as a proper name. One passage uses Satans as a category of fallen angels. Enoch hears an archangel driving out Satans. Other verses use Satan as a singular proper noun, though scholars debate whether it should simply be translated as the adversary. A similar ambiguity appears in the Book of Jubilees, another apocalyptic expansion of Genesis. Here, a figure named Mastema emerges as leader of the demons and is called Satan. Yet again, this seems more a title than a name, closer to the Job-like accuser than to the later Christian devil. In summary, the image of an evil leader of fallen angels, or more broadly, evil spirits, becomes a recurring motif in Second Temple apocalyptic literature. Figures like Shemihaza, Azazel, Belial, and Satan populate these texts. It is on this theological and cultural soil that the early Jesus movement arose. Now we turn to the New Testament. Unlike the Dead Sea Scrolls, the name Belial appears rarely in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul uses it once to denote a malevolent counterpart to Christ. Generally, however, the New Testament refers to God's chief opponent as Satan, or its Greek equivalent, Diabolos, a direct translation of the Hebrew Satan. From diabolos come the English words diabolical and devil. In the New Testament, Satan continues his roles as accuser and tempter, most famously in the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness and in his influence over Judas Iscariot, whom he entered to betray Jesus. Early Christians also attributed illness and death to Satan's agency. He is frequently called an archon, a ruler of demons. Yet, as this account has shown, these attributes do not originate in the Hebrew Bible, but in the theological currents reflected in Azazel, 1st Enoch, Belial, Dead Sea Scrolls, and Mastema, Jubilees. Throughout history, Christians have reinterpreted Hebrew Bible narratives through the lens of the New Testament Satan. For example, it's widely assumed that the serpent who tempted Adam and Eve in Eden was Satan himself. Similarly, the oracle against the king of Babylon in Isaiah 14, "How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn," is often read as describing Satan's origin. The Hebrew day star, Hellel, rendered as Lucifer in the Latin Vulgate, later became Satan's name. Yet the prophet was clearly addressing an earthly ruler. This narrative does not aim to refute Christian theology. Rather, it seeks to encourage historical thinking. As a historian before becoming a scholar of religion, the author was trained in 5 principles of historical thinking, tools students use to analyze past events, concepts, or figures. These principles are change over time, context, causality, complexity, and contingency. Change over time is straightforward, even if the name Satan appears in a 6th century BCE text like Job and a 1st century CE document like the Gospel of Matthew. We must remember that concepts evolve. The Satan of these 2 texts, separated by 1,500 years, is almost certainly not the same. Context reminds us that ideas like Satan develop within interconnected webs of social, cultural, and political influences. Satan's image appears to have taken shape under the Achaemenid Persian Empire and later Hellenistic rule. Thus, analyzing Satan requires understanding these historical and cultural settings. Causality and complexity are trickier. Historians, unlike scientists, cannot rerun experiments to isolate cause and effect. We may argue that Zoroastrianism influenced Satan's evolution, but we cannot pinpoint exact causes, like which Zoroastrian priest first discussed good and evil with an exiled Israelite. We rely instead on logic and probability drawn from primary sources. Yet complexity cautions against oversimplification. To claim Zoroastrianism created, Satan ignores the multifaceted reality of religious development. Finally, contingency, perhaps the most challenging principle, asserts that every historical outcome depends on prior conditions. History is not predetermined. The Babylonians conquered Judah. They exiled its people. The Achaemenids conquered Babylon and allowed the Jews to return. Each step was contingent on the one before. Alter any condition, and the future might have been entirely different. Contingency corrects the teleological fallacy, the idea that history moves toward a destined end. Early 20th century historians often wrote teleological accounts of Christianity, suggesting its triumph over Roman paganism was inevitable. In truth, had different conditions prevailed, another Christian sect might have dominated, one that, for instance, viewed Eden's serpent as a positive figure. Thus, when approaching any religious concept, we should apply these 5 principles to foster deeper, more historically grounded understanding.